in progress.
Good evening. I would like to call to order the ACSD board meeting for June 23rd. The current time is 6:31. At this time, I would like to have members of the board introduce themselves, followed by administration.
Jason Chance.
Ellen Whelan-Wiest.
Steve Cash.
Mary Heather Noble.
Trisha Allen.
Barb Wilson,
Suzanne Buck. Online.
online.
Steve Warzak.
Laura Harthan.
Okay, and administration.
Wendy Baker.
Matt Currency, Director of Finance and Treasury.
Director of Teaching and Learning.
Excellent, thank you for coming out on this very warm day. At least we have air conditioning. Next up is a motion to adopt the agenda. Can I have a motion?
I'll move to adopt the agenda as printed.
A second?
Second.
Any questions, changes?
I guess I only have one question. I noticed under report of the superintendent, the personnel appointments and resignations, we have a name that was on the minutes from last time, so just pointing that out. I don't know if it's a big deal or not, but. Double the approval. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All those in favor of approving the agenda as warned, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, next up, we have our first public comment period. There's no public in the room. Is there public online? This is your time to provide public comment of those listed via Zoom. If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand. Give you a second. Seeing none, then we'll move on to get a recommendation to approve the minutes of June 9th.
So moved.
A second? Okay. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Thank you for keeping those minutes, Mary Heather. It was there's a lot of back and forth and round, and it was very well done. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ditto. Any other? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes of June 9th, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? The minutes have been approved. Next, I'd like to turn it over to Jason for the ACSD bills.
On June 16th, Suzanne and I read one general fund warrant dated June 13th for $1.1 million. There's no questions or issues. I move that we approve the bills as read.
Second.
Any questions? Okay, all those in favor of approving the bills as reported by Jason, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The bills have been approved. Next is the report of the superintendent.
Okay, so the report begins both personnel appointments and resignations. You will see some folks on here. Lisa Holderness is the person that Mary Heather was speaking about, who has, you approved her hire and she was able to accept the position. She had a competing offer, so thank you very much for doing that. We were able to secure a really wonderful science teacher who'll be starting at MUMS. Yep, and we also, we're also able to offer a position to Timothy Korndorfer, who is somebody who is a Middlebury College grad who did his student teaching and whatnot at MUHS and was hired through the process to be able to stay. So
nice.
That's just kind of an interesting story I want to make you aware of. So those are sort of the main things. Nancy Willem, you'll see her resignation. She certainly has longtime service in the district, so it's nice to recognize that. She is retiring, as I understand it, so they are presented for your approval.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I move to appoint Jesse Cash, social worker, 1.0 FTE, appoint Yvonne Harris in behavior intervention as 1.0 FTE Final approval on the appointment of Lisa Holder, science teacher 1.0 FTE, appoint Timothy Korndorfer, INS teacher 1.0 FTE, appoint Ethan Miller, paraprofessional 1.0 FTE, appoint Isaiah Reed, paraprofessional 1.0, and accept the resignation of Nancy Woolen, special ed 1.0.
Could I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Mary Heather. Any questions? Go ahead, Ellen.
Do we have to read out all the names to approve them? Is it possible to just motion, like move to approve as noted in the agenda?
So, I don't know legally, but I do know when Tim was here, he had, from his previous experience, had knowledge that it was really important to have the names and in order, because sometimes you might have to let a couple people go, and he felt the seniority of how they were approved by the board mattered as far as seniority.
I'm just saying, do we have to read them out loud to approve them? I'm not opposed to listing them as they're in the agenda. I'm just wondering why we've adopted the practice of reading all the names.
We used to do it a long time ago, and we moved back to it.
But we don't have to.
You don't have to. You can approve the slate as presented.
Okay, it's just a question I've had for a while.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just a note of interest about that, we have all of our licensed positions filled with one exception that I'll be interviewing next week, except for our special educators and our speech and language professionals. So, but other than that, we will be starting with a full complement of administrators and licensed teachers, which feels great. So for this 5-minute period of time, we are we are good to go, which feels really good.
Done.
Suzanne?
Just a question, all of our administrators that are coming in from out of state have all been able to get Vermont state licenses?
They have,
Great.
yes, they're all set to go. Nellie starts tomorrow. She actually spent the day with us on the 19th. She's trading a few days for the beginning of the week when it's a little thinner for some this week, so she'll be officially on the clock tomorrow, and Sonia will be here July 1st. Everybody has housing, everybody has licenses.
Wow, that's something.
Everybody's ready to go. So this, like I said, it feels like we are ending the year safely and beginning the year in good shape. Relative to the special ed vacancies and the SLPs, we have contingency plans in place, and we'll bide our time a little bit and then see, when we may need to pivot to those. But otherwise, it feels like we're in good shape.
Excellent. I think this is the first time I've heard that at this point. Since I've been on the board.
It is too, I should say, we also, there are a couple of math specialist, instructional specialist positions that we haven't filled yet because, those, we want to make sure that people who are filling those have the appropriate levels of training and whatnot. So, however, we've got, we certainly have what we need for a strong start, I think, and I think that's important. More on that later.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, ready for the question. All those in favor of approving the appointments and resignation as listed out by Suzanne and as recorded in the agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yeah, abstaining as per usual.
Thank you, and Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a tax anticipation note approval, which is likely standard fare. Matt, do you want to go ahead and speak to that?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
It's your turn, Matt. Taxes. Woohoo!
Yes, you would like them to approve an anticipation of tax revenue note, I
Yes.
think.
Each year,
we need to borrow money to cover the anticipated shortfall between when revenue comes to us from the, technically it's all from the Ed Fund, but it comes directly from the towns on behalf of the Ed Fund. And so, for instance, last year Middlebury went from 3 annual payments to 2, which creates a little bit of a revenue squeeze during the middle of the, or sort of the late fall, early winter. In order to continue to pay the bills, we borrow money from National Bank of Middlebury in the amount equal to the cumulative shortfall that we're anticipating. So I believe the exact amount's written on the memo, which I don't currently have up, but it's just under $5 million. I think it's about $4.9 million. That gets borrowed at an interest rate of, I think, 4.2%, 4.15. And generally speaking, I think we pay somewhere in the like $5,000 to $6,000 of interest based on what we normally borrow. It's obviously paid back as quickly as possible, and so it's easy out, easy in, and keeps the bills paid through the school year.
Okay. Jason.
So the note that was attached to the agenda says that the line of credit is due no later than June 30th, 2025. Should that be 2026?
That's 2026. Yeah. I feel like I'm having deja vu
I was
because
gonna say, we
might
may
have
have
done
had
the
this
same
conversation
thing
last year, yeah.
Yes, that's 2026.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
I move that we approve operating line of credit from National Bank of Middlebury in the amount of $4,930,116 no later than June 30th, 2026, interest rate of 1.15%. And authorize the treasurer to assist in this borrow against line of credit as needed on behalf of the
Can I have a
I'll
second? Okay. Any discussion, questions? Any online? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of approving the school district to borrow $4,930,116,000 of operating line of credit from the National Bank of Middlebury, due no later than June 30th, 2026, at an interest rate of 4.15%. Please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Suzanne? I mean, not Suzanne, Laura?
I just said aye.
Okay,
Sorry.
great. I couldn't hear you.
Said aye.
I couldn't hear you. Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it.
The only last thing to note there is I believe that approval requires like every board member's signature. So I think that's the one every year where I have to get it to all of you. And in the past, I think we've just sent out a DocuSign with that. So now that the motion's passed, I'll put that paperwork together and forward in your email.
Excellent.
So we have some student progress information for you, and Courtney Cron is going to go ahead and walk us through some details that I think you'll find to be interesting.
I'm learning in real time tonight how to screen share to a webinar. So right here. Entire screen, Drew says.
I trust Drew more than I trust myself.
Same. We practiced before you came
Okay,
in.
good.
Okay.
I didn't realize
trust
that
you
you had
both.
already
I
talked
trust
to
you
the pro.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So tonight we're gonna look back on the year a little bit. We're gonna talk about data a little bit, and we're gonna look ahead a little bit. And before we do, I want to talk about 3 kinds of data that came up in our most recent board committee, student outcomes committee, that we thought it might be helpful to review here tonight. So norm referenced data compares a student's performance to that of a larger representative group. In our case, it's usually comparing a student's data against that school's data or our district data or the national data for students of that same grade level. A traditional 100-point grading system is a norm reference system where you're reading all of the students' essays and then grading them against each other. Which ones were the best, which ones fell in the middle, which ones fell in the end. In contrast to that, a criterion referenced assessment is assessing students against a set of standards or criteria. In our all of our schools, but especially in our middle and high school where we have individual class assessments, our students use criterion-related assessments. They make it clear to the students, here's your rubric, it's based on these standards, and your performance will be assessed against these clear standards, not in relation to how other students in the class are doing. And the purpose there is to see what a student knows and can do in relation to the standards, in our case, the Common Core standards. And then benchmark data is a type of criterion reference data that's collected periodically so you can track student progress over time and even predict how you might want a student to perform or how a student might perform in the future based on those benchmarks. Oh, thanks. Any questions so far? Two types of assessments. You might remember back in April, I presented on some of our state assessment data and also our state snapshot data, which is all based on the state assessments, at least as far as academic achievement data goes. And the VTCAP is our state assessment. When we looked at it, we talked about that it's administered to students in grades 3 through 9 for ELA and math, 5, 8th, and 11th grade for science. Those results will be released late next month, which starts a whole new cycle of talking about that data and thinking about that data. It's a criterion referenced assessment. So students are assessed against the Common Core standards or the NGSS science standards in the case of science. And I included a quote here from the VTCAP score interpretation guide that I think is really useful for tonight's presentation. It says, as the VTCAP is a single measure at the end of a grade or grade band, it's administered just once a year, interpretations and uses of VTCAP scores should be supplemented with additional measures, including information from classroom assessments. We've been talking about that on the Student Outcomes Committee. We've been talking about that in our District Administrators Data Committee. We've been talking about it as a curriculum team. So I thought that was a useful excerpt to juxtapose the rest of this presentation against. One additional measure that we consider in addition to the VTCAP is our screening data. We use an assessment called the FastBridge Suite, and we assess students 3 times a year. So this is a benchmark screener in the fall, the winter, and the spring in grades K through 9. Additionally, some upperclassmen or students who are receiving Tier 2 interventions also take FastBridge assessments for progress monitoring or for diagnostic reasons. That tool generates for us benchmark data and normed data. So for every set of student results, we can toggle between those 2 data sets, which allows us to look at student data in relation to the benchmarks, in relation to other same grade students, either in district or out of district, and also in relation to students or a group of students' growth over time. So back in April, we talked about the state assessment, the state snapshot data. Tonight, we're going to look at some screening data, another measurement we use that we haven't talked about this year. Before we do that, I'll remind you the quote from the VTCAP interpretation guide said, use additional measures including classroom data. We're not going to look at classroom data tonight, but Some of the classroom level data we do collect at the elementary level are common writing prompts, 3 per year in kindergarten through 5th grade. That's a new measurement for us. This was our first year testing them. We spent the last 2 years writing them. Our Bridges math assessments are end of unit assessments from Bridges to Mathematics, which is a long-standing program we've used. We have our student report card data, and then for students receiving tier 2 layers of support, we also have progress monitoring or diagnostic data. And at the secondary level, we have common assessments from every unit in grades 6 through 10, and then our 11th and 12th grade classes are a little more differentiated, so it's hard to say if those courses have as common assessments as our 6th through 10th grade, but every unit in 6th through 10th grade has a common assessment that all students of that subject and grade level take, at least one, many times more than one.
Questions?
Yes,
Should we reserve questions till the end or
What would you prefer?
I'm totally game for questions, but
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, Courtney, is this something like this, a whole sort of suite of tracking? Is this something that has been consistently used in all the schools for how many years? Or is this something that is new for all of ACSD? I'm just trying to get a sense of how complete our data sets are.
Good
district-wide.
question. So I'm gonna go back one slide. FastBridge, our screener, has been used in our elementary schools for over 10 years.
Okay.
A couple years ago, we switched our secondary screener from an assessment called Star 360, which is another product from the same company. We switched it to FAST to align so that we were using the same screener in all grades. So while we've had a screener for over 10 years, it's FAST. I think we're in our second or third year of implementing FAST. And we have some questions about whether or not that was the right move. But that's under discussion, mostly because FAST doesn't have any what's called linking studies to the Common Core. So as you've set your goal 3 for us, we've become really interested in how do we track student progress towards the standards in a way that's a little more standardized than our common local assessments out of our units, but more frequent than once a year. And I'm not saying that FastBridge doesn't give us good data that's standards-based, but there are no linking studies to say, like, if we looked at a correlation between student progress on the FastBridge screener and the VTCAP, it's sort of a range of correlation as opposed to a direct link. Our common assessments from our units have been designed, I'd say, over the last 7 years. And they do change, but they only change when a group of teachers of the same grade level and subject agree to that change. And our curriculum, we like to say it's never finished. So we look at the student data and we calibrate assessments and we change them based on interest and need. And our elementary math assessments we've had for a long time, but teachers have never been asked to record that data in any place that's accessible to someone beyond them. So even now, I don't have a place where I can go and see all of our teachers' Bridges assessment data from this year, but the plan is that that was optional this year and an expectation for next year that we're recording student math assessment data. Same with the writing assessments.
On grade level.
On grade level, right. Good question. So I guess a shorter way to say that would have been it depends on the assessment.
It's okay though, I appreciate the in-depth.
Okay. So now we're gonna get in, the rest of the presentation tonight is really about our FastBridge data, because that is a set of data that we've had for some time and that we can compare students' progress from 3 points within just this school year. We use this FastBridge screening data to identify students who might benefit from additional support. Vermont's Act 139 that was passed this year in relation to literacy and reading actually now requires all schools in Vermont administer a reading screener anyway, but we had one in place for reading and math. We use it to get information for determining the optimal allocation of resources, to inform our classroom choices, and to inform our Tier 2 choices. So this is our FastBridge reading and literacy data. On the left, I have shaded our normed data, and on the right, I have the benchmark data. And you can see that if you're looking for percent change or growth, there's not a huge difference when you compare the two sets. But when you look at strictly percent proficient, the normed data is much more advantageous, or our normed data turns up higher percentages of proficiency than when comparing students against a cut benchmark score. The reason I have these grade bands broken out like this is that K1 students take a different assessment than 2nd through 9th graders. So I have that broken out. And then 2nd through 9th graders all take the same assessment, but I tried to break it out in groups where I could isolate the data without revealing data sets that were too small. Any questions about this? Oh, Steve.
There was a discussion in the committee about the tests are measuring progress, and so the ones that you get in the fall or where you start and one that you get in the spring are ones that are supposed to show growth, because the ones in the spring assume that there's going to be a year growth, so they have a year's growth built into the test. Is that correct?
I think so. Another way of saying that is the expectations go up throughout the year. Is that what you're saying, Steve? So not only do you need to stay at your current level, you need to learn and demonstrate more as the year goes on.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
0% change is a year of growth.
Yeah, if you stayed at the exact same percentage, that could reflect students and teachers working hard to keep up with that new learning. Yeah. Other questions about this slide? Same information, but pertaining to our math data.
Mary Heather.
I do have a question just about, and I guess I'm not sure I'll articulate this well, but I am wondering about sort of the calibration of growth that is expected, and how that, I mean, obviously, this is your world, not necessarily the world I'm living in, but I'm curious whether the growth, whether the expected growth for these tests for each, grade band level of students has been tested, demonstrated as being reasonable, or or if indeed, these should be as concerning as they sure look to me.
So something we chose after some deliberation and actually some data something we chose not to include was some specific growth data that we did look at in the Student Outcomes Committee, but we felt like it confused these slides a bit for tonight. This tool, FastBridge, sets a default growth measure, and we can change it as a district if we're expecting a higher rate of growth or a lower, but we've left it for the last 3 years at least at this default setting. And something that this slide doesn't show, but is a really interesting conversation probably for another time, and one that our principals are having right now at their own building level, is that there can be students who are proficient in the fall and proficient in the spring and had very little growth because their proficiency levels were already so high that it wasn't difficult to keep up with that level. There can be students who obviously weren't proficient in the fall and became proficient. That's an obvious growth. But there's also students who might start not proficient and end not proficient, but have demonstrated really significant growth. And that's getting a little bit beyond your question, but we are leaving this default so everyone has this same measurement that's applied through an algorithm in the back end of the tool.
There should be statistical validity between point A and point B, as the psychometricians build these products. Just like in the VTCAP, there should be the same thing from grade 3 to grade 4. It should, it should be aligned in that way. I've not seen that to look as exact as we're led to believe, but I think the conversation is real in terms of, our students progressing the way that we would hope they would in order to be able to feel good that they are learning and demonstrating what we want them to do. So although, I don't think these are quite as exact as people like to claim. It's not necessary that it gets in the way of thinking about them, as a tool that tells us something.
After our winter screener, which I didn't include that data here, but after every time a student takes the assessment, the tool turns up a predicted score and a goal score for the student, and you can track individual students' progress. Where are they on track to meet that goal? Are they on track to meet their predicted score? And then obviously at the end of the year, you can look at percent change.
Okay. Thank you.
Suzanne?
When, especially on the spring ones, when are those assessments given? Like, are they given like the week before a vacation, the week right after vacation?
Yeah, there is a window, and schools get to choose. But the screener window starts after the VTCAP window, which went, I believe, this year until May 3rd. So then, we administer a lot of assessments. As soon as that VTCAP is over, this screener window opens, and schools choose within that, basically within the last month when they wanted to administer that.
And these are results that I think, we sort of had a feel for already, which is part of why we had the equity block built the way that it was built. And, Courtney will talk a little bit about that, but, I think this is, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if most school districts in the country had something similar, unless they're doing something very intentional relative to math. Intentionality can shift those, and that's certainly sort of what we're going to be working toward. But it's not out of the realm of kind of what we expected. The challenge is that we're working to keep where we are in if you look at this together as an aggregate. Really what we need to be doing also is boosting more kids kind of, way over the line. So that's the kind of conversation that we're having, and I'm proud of the teams in the district that have been talking readily about that, as opposed to saying, well, it seems like, we're only, 1% off over here in 6-8, that seems fine. That's not the kinds of conversations that our educators are having, as they're able to have, more facilitated conversations about this type of data.
Something to know is that student data informs our budget investments. So starting back with the zero-based budgeting in the fall, principals were creating, we were calling them triangle plans, but they were looking at the data they had available to them at that time, including our fall screener data, and at that time, the newly released VTCAP data, to inform their budget plans. And out of that came, these are investments, not necessarily full hires at this time, as Wendy pointed out, but we budgeted for 7.5 FTE of math instructional specialists, 2.5 FTE of literacy instructional specialists, $100,000 for professional development in math and or literacy, and then $60,000 for summer and after school programming. And that was hedging a bet in case we didn't receive a pretty substantial summer programming grant that we also received. So that grant is benefiting the communities of Shoreham and Bridport based on the data that we had at that time. We targeted those schools, and this investment can now go to our other elementary schools because of that grant.
Which Courtney and LaShawn and Jenny got together to write. So essentially, you know, we have summer programming, particularly right now, that's beginning in Salisbury, Mary Hogan, Cornwall, Bridport, Shoreham, MUHS, and MUMS.
A little bit of Weybridge.
Say again?
A little bit of Weybridge.
And a little bit of Weybridge. And because we were able to secure that grant, and the way that most students are being invited to join is that the priority slots are being given to students who need that extra support in those ways. So those invitations are going out first to make sure that students have that chance to have those extra doses, you know, which is that's a helpful practice.
Something that I feel every time I start to look at this data is that the most useful way to look at it is by school, and we had that conversation in the fall when we met to look at our state data by school. And in that same way, the principals have a list of criteria that they're using to identify these students Wendy's referencing. And it includes this data, their state data, behavior data, attendance data, a whole list of data that they're looking at in order to pinpoint their priority candidates for summer programming. Another cool fact is that about 40 ACSD educators signed up for PD that started today and goes through Thursday. Half of them are in math PD, focused on kindergarten and first grade instruction through a third-party vendor called the Ongoing Assessment Project, which is all about using formative data in math instruction. And the other half are here at the high school learning about Vermont's new educational quality standards. So shout out to them, most of whom are here on a volunteer basis just to learn about new or helpful information.
Yes, Steve.
So am I correct in understanding that there's some amount of summer and after school programming in 6 of the 7 towns in this district?
Right now, summer. Focus is on summer. So, you know, after school programming is kind of still in flux, you know, but right now, summer, that's true.
All right.
Yeah.
I do have to say that's just kind of a little bit disheartening for Rick to not have summer programming. I realize it's a time of flux, but you know, it does stick out.
It does in the sense that their building, that's not what's happening in their building. There's the students in Ripton, however, were given the same invitations to that, to the programming at the Salisbury site in the same manner that the Salisbury students were. And it was a decision, you know, after lots of looking into the circumstance about how best to handle that, and given the nature of kind of how the relationships between the students and the two communities were being formed, it was decided it was in the students' best interest to be able to keep them together as learners. So whether that's the right decision or not, you know, will remain to be seen. but it was an intentional choice, so that was considered.
So the decision was made to keep students together in the town they're from, do I understand correctly?
No, all the students. So next year, all the students in Ripton and Salisbury will be learning together, and the decision was that it's good to start that this summer, from the beginning. And Salisbury had the site that was more conducive to that for this summer. So we'll see how that goes. But it was reviewed pretty extensively, and that was the best choice.
Yeah, in the future, I think when that's mentioned, just making sure to know that people in Ripton have the same opportunity to attend. Like, if
Yes.
it's at the school or not, that's debatable, but certainly making sure that those students who should be able to access these opportunities.
Yes, they did, yeah.
Bridport Shorehams is a single program.
Single program as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all good pieces to mention.
Yep.
Steve's hand is up.
Oh, Steve, sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute there. So this seems like this is a important way to address some of the discrepancies that we've seen in performance data, especially for students that are economically disadvantaged. And I heard programs mentioned at all the schools except Salisbury, which I maybe got overlooked, but it seems like we would be concentrating the programs in the places where they're needed that have high poverty rates, and the students are struggling with these particular issues. Could you address that? How these resources have been allocated with an eye towards income sensitivity?
Steve, I may have misspoke, or my voice doesn't carry all the way to you, and so Salisbury has a program, and that program is serving students that are from Ripton and Salisbury also. So that concern, I hope, is put to bed. The schools had a certain number of slots, and they, proportioned to their population and related to their staffing. One of the operational considerations for these programs are, it takes teachers available to be able to work in them, and, that's not teachers have other plans for their summers sometimes, so we have to work with that carefully, but they were given slots, and they filled them with the same criteria, in the same way. We all met together and made that decision, and it was actually started with performance, Steve. So it looks at who needs extra help and how do we pull that in, and then are there other factors that need to be considered, so that way there are balanced groups as well as students who have additional risk factors that need those extra supports. So I think we've worked hard, the principals have worked hard and the assistant principals to ensure that the concerns that you've raised are addressed.
Okay, thanks.
Suzanne?
So, sorry, along the lines of what Steve also mentioned is, I know that for some communities, transportation is difficult for people to get kids to a program that might only run an hour or 2 hours. So was that taken into consideration as far as how to get these students there and get them home?
So for the Bridport Shoreham summer program, which is this year held at Shoreham, last year it was held at Bridport, but they've established a routine of sharing staff and doing this program together. There was a competitive state grant for summer or after school programming that we sought and used a model that we created, LaShawn, Jenny, and I, for Bridport and Shoreham, to kind of test what are some of the possibilities, and if we had more funding than we currently do in our local budget, so if we could wave a wand, what would we do? And we chose those two schools to target this grant for based on some of the data we had looked at in the fall. And we wrote into the grant transportation via bus, either from students' homes directly to the school and back, or depending on how many students we're enrolling, possibly from a few, what are they called? Nodes? Gathering spots, so you get to this point and then you come. We also wrote in, if a barrier for participating was childcare after summer school, we wrote in funding for not childcare, but participation in Cucamonga or ARC childcare, which is right next to Shoreham School, and a couple other opportunities we looked into, and transportation from the school to those opportunities. So that is an example of something we played around with in this grant for those two communities to see how successful it could be. I think time will tell how successful that was, and it's an expensive endeavor to provide transportation, as you all know. So that transportation is secured for those two communities for 3 years for summer programming, and if it increases rates or decreases barriers, that's something to consider for sure.
Yeah, it is the only site in which we're doing that, but there are some, we're trying some bits and pieces either, and beyond to be able to try to capture this information so that we can build appropriate equitable opportunities, knowing what actually works and what actually is helpful, which is not always what we assume works or assume is helpful. So that's a good example. Another one is we're in conversation about an changing the after-school program at Salisbury with the arrival of students from Ripton in a manner that makes it later and also provides transportation up the hill to RES for students in Ripton. To see what is that? How does that help things? What does that mean? Academic intervention that happens in an after-school model is highly successful as an evidence-based strategy. So, these are things that we're going to learn from and be able, hopefully, to build upon as we get actual information about what seems to be helpful.
All right. Pretty much my last slide, but in the same way that our student data informs our budget investments, I just wanted to bring you back to, in April when I presented, I talked about our continuous improvement plan, which is a plan we are to keep you all apprised of throughout the year. And right now, our principals are looking at the data they've collected throughout the year, and they're completing what are called data inventories, where they take this data, the state data, other data sets, and they look at specific demographics outlined by the state, mostly pertaining to historically marginalized groupings of students. And they take that data, they complete this data inventory, and they summarize what are the needs in our school to work on closing this student achievement gap. And those data inventories get uploaded with the federal grant investments that Wendy, Matt, Kathy Roberts, and I are all collaborating on right now to submit by next Monday. And as the state approves our investments, more and more they're going back to these data inventories to say, do we see a need in your data that ties directly to the investments you're writing before they approve them? And then once those are approved, principals are asked by the end of September to create school-based comprehensive improvement plans. Sort of like, if you have this money now, what are your plans based on the data and the resources you've been allocated for this school year that you're putting in place to meet the goals that you've outlined? So I was just trying to highlight for you, this is a cycle we're always in, and sometime in late September or October, if budget season isn't too full of information, we'll circle back to some of that.
Are you saying we should shorten some of
those
that
plans, and we'll look at some of that data, and we're always just connected and sort of spiraling in that way. And I think you've asked your questions throughout the
Just as a point of reference, so last year on this date, same meeting, we were just getting an initial primer from Courtney about D6 and about how in some of the schools, right, there were some inconsistent grade configurations, a variety of classrooms that are of multiple different sizes, not equitable throughout the district, different curricular gaps present in different ways, and there were some schools that had not finalized some of those things, at this point last year. So to be here with this presentation now feels a lot different to me. I don't know if it feels that way to you, but it feels a lot different. And Courtney and I, for the last 7 months, have been the only administrators in the district office with administrative licenses. We're the only ones that have experience leading educational programs. So every AOE question, every field question, every professional development request, every discussion that has had to do with teaching and learning has been fielded mostly by Courtney and with the help of her team. So we will have other great folks joining us in that work as we go, but there's a lot that happens in the district office, in the coordination of those things, in the administration of all the funds on a programmatic level, the evaluation. Never mind the discussions that make changes that show the difference between these two presentations happen in a way that help people feel remotely comfortable. So, Courtney, in addition, evaluated certainly the 3 classroom teachers in Ripton last year when we had the administrative change. She took that on and just said, here, let me provide continuity and stability for these educators relative to that. There might have even been more, so I'm just really appreciative of her service this year. We've asked a lot of her.
Thanks. We have a good team, and also our conversation is changing in a good way. I think if I think back maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, I think the conversation was really I don't know why, but about standardized testing data. We know that's not valid. We don't look at that, and then I think with the markers that were put in your plan, we all sort of went like, whoa, we're gonna look at this state testing data now, as we should. And then throughout this year, the conversations become more nuanced, to really discussing at all levels, the board level, our office level, the school level. What are all the data points we have? Why are they all important? And where do we go from here? Which feels like a really professional and respectful conversation to be having of our students.
And I just want to thank you. I remember a year ago very clearly, and when I think about everything that has transpired over the last year, including an equity-based budget, it's comes together here, right, in many ways. And so I'm really excited to see what the results will be a year from now. And hopefully we'll start to see a little bit of the fruits of the labor that you guys have really taken on, which has been just amazing.
That's a great way of articulating the spiral. That's what I meant to say when I referenced budgets.
Normally, I don't do that well, so thank you so much.
Yep. So you will, as Nellie comes on, her assistant superintendent project is to take some of the nuts and bolts pieces of this work that Courtney's been holding among her many other responsibilities and continue to bring that forward, shepherding the district, data and assessment work as we're thinking about our assessments and how they line up, what we need to be looking at to ensure evidence of learning is apparent to us. Nellie will also be working with Courtney and Sonia to support the Student Outcomes Committee and learning about those things and thinking about those things. so that Courtney can be a full content contributor to that. We need her expertise and the expertise of the team she supervises. She will also be continuing to provide support to the principals who are busy with the data in their buildings and thinking about, what does this mean? What does this look like? How do I talk about this? What are ways to think about this in the right context. So we're not chasing scores on a sheet, that never works out well, but we're actually having the right conversations, and they're able to do that with confidence, which is work that our building principals are taking on in just very thorough ways as they're learners in some of this, and as they're thinking about how to best support the teachers that they have, and also the integration of the new resources that they have in order to bring about more success for kids, which is the point. So,
Mary Heather.
I'm wondering if both of you could offer some thoughts about how we can look at data moving forward to make sure that obviously we're seeing student progress as a whole district, but also making sure that we are getting equitable, efforts across the district with our different school populations, and, how are we going to handle the challenges of reporting for really small cohorts, and making sure that, we're doing our due diligence and being accountable to the responsibilities that we've set for ourselves.
I think we found one new strategy this spring when we, I think this came out of the comprehensive needs assessment, or the continuous improvement plan presentation I did in April, if I recall, which was around the same time of the Bridgeport-Shoreham conversations about grade configuration. And a strategy we used was lumping K2 and 3-5 data by school, which gave us an N big enough to compare. I couldn't do that tonight because the screener splits at second, or it's a K1, right? And then a 2-9, it's two different assessments. So for this particular measurement, I couldn't use that strategy, but that felt like a breakthrough when we could do that.
Remember we have Sonia, and you say her last name, Afeline. Afeline, as like AFLINE, kind of it's German. So even though it starts with an O in terms of how it's spelled, it's pronounced Afeline. So she's coming on in her role as Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Restorative Practice. She has pretty deep background in school-based data and student success performance at various levels. She will be positioned much of her work right between Tier 1 and Tier 2, both in social and emotional learning and in academic learning. That's often sort of, where inequities begin, is when there's a slide that happens between Tier 1 and Tier 2, which is right where she wants to be. And she's coming out of a large district that's just outside of Chicago, where they spend a lot of time and energy and resources actually tracking the very things that you're talking about. And so I think, we're excited to have her expertise come on board. I mean, Nellie also, prior to coming here tomorrow, she, her most recent work has been with the regional BOCES in the capital region in New York, in terms of helping schools. I think she had nearly 100 schools on her caseload actually think about data in different types of ways that are all equity based. I mean, that's what we're all looking for, is where are pockets where we have differentiation of service that is showing up in outcome. Where are factors coming together that tell us that we have work to do to ensure we're seeing kids the same way and supporting them in good ways. So Courtney and I will be able to take whatever experience we have, and add it to theirs. And I'm very excited about how all that work happens.
Exciting year.
It is an exciting year, yes. Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
I have a question, more just a comment. I appreciate seeing the data and having the loop get closed, and rather than just kind of a chart that tails off and we're not doing anything with it, it's really good to see that we're assessing things, using that information to make informed decisions, and then starting that process over again. So I really appreciate that.
Thanks. Can I say one more thing? The Student Outcomes Committee was so useful in looking at a first draft of this presentation, in which I had actually left off all the fall data, because we look at it so much in my mind. It's all in all of our minds, and why would we need to put that up there again? And something as simple as that, or as what is a screener, or when is a screener given? That's just to let you know that's a committee that's already been useful and is helping steer our thinking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are we ready to
Yes,
move on?
yes,
So,
we are. I think
so the
so.
last thing, thank you, Courtney. The last thing in the superintendent's report is a legislative update, which is really just a marker for conversation, you know, for the public record, if it's important relative to the the passage of H 454 in both the House and the Senate, and it's assumed the governor will be signing it into law. I don't know if he's done it quite yet, but he's about to, certainly. So I have been invited to come and spend some time with Dave Sharp, talking about the impacts of that potentially, on our district, or just kind of in the area, and I would expect that there'll be more communication. Some of you may have heard from legislators who are just sharing their perspectives and kind of what was behind that, either through blogs that they keep or emails that they're sending out and about. So rather than a review, it's really more of just a time for open conversation. If you have questions that we can answer, we're happy to try to do that. If there are important points to raise for public awareness, we can also do that too. I didn't want to talk at the legislation for a period of time, but really just more provide an opportunity.
It seems like there's a lot of detail that will be worked out this coming session, right? That 454 points to, and I'm wondering how we can be effective in really helping to continue to provide input on that legislation, and as a board, what are folks thinking? How almost a critique of what we did last session, what worked, what didn't work, how can we be more effective, or continue to be effective. I think this is really, in my memory, the first time that we actually took on providing input and following the bills as closely as we did. And it can be grueling, especially when there's a lot of churn happening and things change so quickly. But I'd be open to hear what folks think. How can we do better, and what worked, what could maybe work better. Because it's going to be, I see it being as much or more this coming session, as they're making decisions. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm just wondering if Dr. Berger could just give us maybe next 12-month overview. If this legislative agenda stays on track, what do the next 12 months look like?
Yeah, I may forget some pieces, but I think I could get the big ones. Help if I forget. The big thing that will begin to happen as of August 1st is that the district consolidation task force, which might not be named quite that, but close, will be assembled. There'll be 6 legislators and 5 people that are appointed by various groups that are from the field. They're retired superintendents or business managers that are designed to create a task force of 11 people who will utilize a number of different resources to be able to present 3 proposals to the legislative body for the next session for redistricting. So one of those proposals has to include supervisory unions. It's widely assumed that proposal was politically engineered to be in service to two sort of groups. One group is the group of independent schools who are they're very interested in maintaining district's ability to tuition to independent schools, and the supervisory union structure is best able to accommodate that. There are a number of constraints on that in the bill, so it's yet to be seen how much of that will actually be able to continue once those details get worked out. The other is small districts, that are too small to be able to exist under the recommendations now, which is that you have about 4,000 students, if possible. I think, I forget the exact language, but it's kind of close to that. So Lincoln, for example, that's probably there's not a pathway forward for them to exist as a district. If there is a proposal that suggests that Addison County becomes a supervisory union, then they might be able to do that. And so, I don't know how that works, because it used to be that supervisory unions had their own boards. I served previously as a superintendent in the supervisory union, and I've not heard of any intent to have that many boards in existence. So I'm not sure how all that exactly works. So that is a big task force. That will be a highly political, very challenging set of things to work through. So in about 3 months after they begin, there is another group that will begin thinking about voting wards and what that's going to mean in order to be able to line up school district representation in step with the district consolidation recommendations. So in the 3 maps, if you will, that are generated, then there'll be kind of three representation maps that go along with that. So just using Addison County as an example, if one map has us all together, then okay, well, how many votes does Goshen get on the board if Goshen's involved, and how does that all get figured out? Which obviously is of deep interest to our communities for really important reasons. So that will also begin concurrently, and the idea is that those are completed prior to the legislative session, so that the legislation can set that and come out with the approval of newly consolidated districts and the voting wards, which would then go into effect July 1st of 2026. So that just means that the AOE will begin supporting those districts to get them up to speed. They will begin to re-engineer their software systems, their everything, to be able to make a whole statewide switch, so that once the districts are actually in place, which is July 1st of 2028, when they begin to take custody of students and buildings and employees and contracts and bank accounts and so on and so forth, those systems will already be set up to be able to make that happen. So, if all of that takes place, then the next piece will be the financial formula. I'm not sure that will be on everybody's mind right away. It'll be mostly the district consolidation and whatnot. There is a special ed strategic plan that is also starting right away, that is designed to take a look at the extraordinary costs, particularly, to determine kind of where are we going with that and how are we handling that, since across the state, we've not spoken about how we have one provider for transportation. No, we have one. It's very challenging to work through that in a fiscally responsible manner, no matter where you are or what you're trying to do. So those are maybe the high points. Have I forgotten anything over the next 12 months?
Tuition to approved schools, they're gonna kind of work through that. appointment of members of the State Board of Education.
Mary Heather's got her hand up.
Yeah,
I'm curious about, I don't remember seeing much of this, but I also just very glossed over it initially, but points of and opportunities for public input on this process. Do you recall whether this is something that will be incorporated to these, teams or whatever who are working on this over the next, or whether that process comes after the three options are delivered to legislators?
So the two task force I mentioned, which will be doing the work that is obviously of great interest to all of our communities as well as our staffs, our kids. They will have to do their work in public, so they will have to have their meetings, announced to meet legislative, expectations relative to, transparency. That said, I think it would be, what might be helpful is just making sure that the people who are representing the district are aware that you expect them to follow the progress, and then you would very much like them to be giving you updates as to how this is going. Whether that's we're having legislative breakfasts that are more frequent or whatever it is, so that way people can have access to what's happening and how do we know that it's as some of the legislators have mentioned, it's some of this work doesn't happen in the public eye, and so really tracking it and understanding, what that looks like, I think is going to be important. Vermont School Boards Association will do that. Vermont Superintendents Association, Vermont Principals Association will do that through our executive directors who will live at the State House during these time periods. And a number of us keep in touch with people individually that are in the middle of that work to try to find out what's going on. But I think, the legislators who are in service to the communities here, that is part of their job, it is to bring people along. I think the Senate took a lot of criticism for not reaching out, not doing their work in a different way that allowed people to connect with what was truly happening before it happened, so that there are a number of people across the state that are probably waking up to some of this information, in different ways. And that, as you know, was, as I wrote to our communities, that was my number one concern, that, these are very big changes. We will have, Matt, two more school years of voting on a budget. So perhaps, unless the governor does something different.
And a big term.
yeah.
Right, so,
Actually, how does it work?
Because we just did
FY26.
26.
We just did 26 and it's supposed to be implemented for FY 28, correct?
29.
Oh,
July
29,
1,
okay.
28 is the beginning.
Yep, you're right, okay.
So
we have two more budgets.
at most, communities will have two more budgets to vote on, at most.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it might be likely that there's a shift in there somewhere, where we move toward a different type of model before the foundation formula is finalized with the new districts, under the guise of the need to control spending, because that's the perspective of the governor, and that's what he will push for. So I think, in reality, your 5-year strategic plan may be a 4-year strategic plan, right? We may only have 3 more starts together, like that. Those are very real things, and I think I don't know whether we would be big enough under the way that people are putting things together to stay on our own. It seems doubtful.
They're
right?
saying 4,000 to 8.
Yeah, and it says there's to the extent practical.
True.
So
Is that
that's the
4,000,
question.
is that actual students or is that weighted?
Well, we think
So
it's
how does
weighted.
that translate?
It doesn't
We think
say
it's
in
weighted,
here.
It
so
depends on what the weights are.
Right, and it depends on your student body, obviously, but
Right.
it is weighted.
If it is, then I just did a quick check.
Yeah.
For what Addison County would be, for instance, and it's I think it's 6,000. So
if it's weighted.
If it's weighted.
If it's not weighted, it's
Not weighted.
nearly 4.
Yeah.
And it depends on who you count. If you count all the towns in Addison County, right, which as it is right now would be part of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 school districts. We're covered right now by 6 school districts because Hancock and Granville are in White River Valley, right? And then
Whiting.
Leicester, Whiting, and Orwell and Goshen are in Rutland Northeast.
Orwell's Valley.
Oh, right, Orwell's in Slate Valley, so 7 school districts.
That's
That's
Slate
south
Valley.
of us. Yeah, that's south.
that's Slate Valley.
So I think I don't see us being big enough to stand on our own in these analyses. There's some question, probably a point of conversation, I'm guessing, would be, is there a way that districts that wish to work together can? Or is there, if you have a district that is of size and has stability, for example, our district in Addison County, we have 9 schools, 8 of which will be in operation, for next year. Mount Abe, I believe, has 5, Lincoln has 1, Addison Northwest has 3, right? So the infrastructure we have to have has to be complex enough to be able to probably absorb other schools because we already have to be at a certain point. I don't know that any of that kind of thinking, as that might apply throughout the state, is what will come to the table versus we dissolve everything and we start again new, which is what is discussed most often right now. So
We're obviously not thinking about facilities at all.
And they are thinking about technical centers. They're thinking about regional high schools, things of that nature. Whether those things will rule the day over other things, because they're also thinking about, Matt, you may have to help with this, tax liabilities and mapping, right?
That's
And
one of the things is that makes it very hard to know what the tax fallout from any of these plans will be because we can only compare against ourselves.
Right.
But in a redrawing of the map, the entire tax base will be changed and we don't know how. And so it's really hard apples to apples at this point. It does sound, like there might be more consideration for grand list value and tax capacity than, educational outcomes when they draw the maps.
Yeah.
And that some of the, what we've heard suggests, they're trying to create as much tax equivalence.
yeah, I think it will be really helpful for the people who are part of this work or have access to this work, which is our legislative representation, truly to help to be accountable for what exactly is happening, what is driving this train, what are we looking at? I mean, and I also think that, one of the reasons that I didn't support this bill as it ended up at this time is that, to those who asked, is that, the tax relief is what I understood people to be asking for as the legislators were working this out. And that, in the estimation of many legislators, could have been handled on its own, independently. Yes. And, my understanding is that the governor was not interested in signing off on that unless it had the rest of everything in there, which, to me, I think Vermonters need to be very clear what they're asking for and what they're not asking for, and what they are expecting and from their citizen legislature and what they're not. And I think some of those messages maybe got muddled in some ways, and I think it was difficult for people to sort out really what the right thing was as they were trying to discern how to vote, how to move things forward. So I think being clear about what you support and what you don't, if it continues, this board will I assume carry, forward, and well, there'll be a new board elected that will manage the new school district, right? That school district will hire a superintendent. That superintendent will help put together whatever that new team is in that way. The old board will sunset the district that's in place, and perhaps some of those board members will be on the new board and perhaps not. And perhaps, there'll be a way to manage gaps in board service. If somebody's off for, if your 3-year term ends and there's 1 year left, right? Are we doing that the same way, or, what is that? I mean, are people going to run to be on a board for a year that's then sunsetting and is somewhat of a lame duck, in that process?
That was the on-ramp that was used for the transition from supervisory unions to districts.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that is interesting in this process is that, you already worked together in a supervisory union, so you at least knew each other by communities, for better or worse, right? You had working relationships. You already shared a superintendent and a district office. In this case, and a high school and a middle school. In this case, there will be districts that are formed. It's likely of people that don't work together and maybe never thought they would be interested in working together, and be so all that will have to be worked out, as time goes on. I hope that was helpful, Jason.
And I did notice, and I'm actually looking at the report that the VSBA published for us. And there is a task force. The task force must hold 2 public hearings this fall. Yeah, 2 public hearings, as they're forming the new districts. So
I think that's in addition to their work being done in a manner that is public.
Which is true.
Yes.
That the public hearings are two-way dialogue where people can come and ask questions, provide feedback, and expect a response back. So that's going to happen sometime probably this fall. I would have this, because December 1st is here before we know it.
Correct. Yeah.
But if you have thoughts of, kind of how we might be able to work together, and really continue to keep abreast of what's going on here, how we can be effective, the most efficient way to be effective, please shoot me an email or whatever, because this is a lot. This is
on the operational end. Obviously, we'll continue to do. We will also be shining our shoes. We will also be ensuring that things are buttoned up, documented well, policy manuals clean, the good work that is in place here and has been built here over decades of work will be packaged well, because I think I like to think that there might be a board out there that's going to be interested in that. And so we'll want to be ready to be able to share that good work so that it's able to continue to be of good service to not only the students here, but also other students if there are opportunities for those kinds of things. So that's part of what we will be doing, at every step, which includes in our evidence of learning framework qualitative measures. as well as quantitative measures, so that we're documenting the learning students are doing that go with our learner profile, and how we're assessing those things and what does that look like.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to kind of wrap my mind around all this and have been for the past week or so. To be perfectly honest, I think it's just going to be a very challenging time to be a school board and to try and support kind of the operational side in an effective way. It's just going to be tricky because the system won't stop, and there will be an end date. And I mean, I was just, even on the way down here, I was reading about, I think, 2 resignations from the Commission on the Future of Education. And I sat in this room and was at one of their meetings, and it just, I mean, I don't know what the line between politics and school boards are exactly, but it just, this seems extremely haphazard. Of a way to go about this, knowing that just 2016 this district was first created. Like 10 years in education doesn't seem like a huge amount of time to let changes take effect. And like, I just also think there's realities that the cost of education is going up, and that you can pull in all these levers all you want, and certainly if anybody thinks the end-all be-all solution is transportation, Matt has at least convinced me that the end-all be-all solution to all of this is not transportation. And so I just I mean, I'm just kind of confused, and I'm coming from a town that we had to work through not having students in the school next year, and then to have this handed down is
a lot.
Like, I'm not really sure what else people expect, and certainly there's going to be a lot of questions, and I think there should be. So.
You will probably be looking at the work that we do over this next year with an eye of ensuring that your responsibility as the board that is taking care of these students is top of mind, because if this legislation continues to move forward, if it can't agree on district maps, then it stops. So that is that's a caveat. If they do agree on district maps, then the rest of it falls into place. So, if they do agree on district maps, there will be a board that has less community connection to our students, arguably, that will be making decisions for the kids and communities that this board has cared for decades, and in different iterations, people that have served on it. And so we will likely be having conversations about how do you wish to use this time, while you can, and as a common refrain, while at the same time, to Steve's point, we are watching things unfold to determine what may or may not happen and when, and what does that mean. So those are that's just what our work will look like, I think, over the next year.
Okay, thank you. Moving forward, and we are definitely on schedule to get done by 8:30. So we're good. So this was really good discussion, though. So very good report. Thank you. I have just a couple things. Just wanted to give you an update that we were able to fill out the questions needed for the nomination, School Board Association nomination. They gave boards until the, I think the 28th or whatever to do that. So who knows? Actually, I was pleased once you filled out all the questionnaire questions. We look pretty good. You know, it was, you know, once you start thinking through what they were asking and what we were able to show as evidence, it was kind of neat. So fingers crossed, that would be a really awesome thing. Next, just wanted to mention, you know, there's a whole bunch of bill changes, obviously, that the VSBA has put in their report that affects education. But I did want to just highlight one that jumped out at my attention was the open meeting law. You know, some of it was just removing some of the confusing language that we all are struggled with of what is non-advisory versus advisory, and they've changed that to public body now, so it just makes a little more sense. But there were some changes. Number one, meeting agendas must have sufficient detail related to what the board will be discussing. You know, when I think we may already do that. You know, I think when you look at our agenda, you know the topics that we're covering. When I go in and look even at the School Board Association has a template for a board agenda, it doesn't have that level of detail on it. So I'm thinking that might not impact us, but we'll have to keep an eye on it. For executive sessions, we do have to now say that it's a proposed executive session. And remember, in some cases, we have to go through a two-step process to do the executive session, as our lawyer friend pointed out to us. And that we need to be sure that we include in there the nature of the business of executive session. Once again, we do that. Do we provide enough? We'll have to, you know, see if in fact we do, you know, because we do give the reason. So that will just be something I'll continue to watch. And then last, there was warnings, expand posting notice of special meetings to include neighboring municipalities. And I'm like, not quite sure what that is and why, but that was the main changes here. But I do recommend for summer reading, you know, this is a really good summary. And there were some healthcare bill changes for prescription drugs, right? Caps that maybe help us a little bit with how, you know, with the overall cost of healthcare, but we'll see. But that's all really I wanted to share.
Cell phones.
Oh, cell phones, that's right. Yeah, that's a biggie. Yeah.
Which we had already been working our way through, so, you know, I think that's, however, that will not go down easily, I think, with parents, actually more so than kids, you know. Parents are used to reaching their kids through the day, and you know, so that's a little bit challenging. And however, you know, our administrators already had plans in place for that, you know, so I think it will be okay. It will mean other staff will have a different thing to monitor, you know, as people find ways through that. You know, it will also change our way of working because you know, we don't want adults running through the hallways with phones, which means, you know, administrators may or may not be able to take calls or texts or things of that nature in the same way they do now. So it will change the way we do business, not just what the students have access to throughout the day. So we're gonna work that out together. Yeah, it's bell to bell, which means, you know, not until after school.
Okay, so that's all that I have. So next is report of the board. One of the things before we get started in going through each of the committee updates, I really want folks to weigh in whether or not, you know, we had the idea, the executive committee, to have report of the board as a vehicle, you know, that we could put together various committee updates and have it in the meeting materials. You know, if folks think that's a good idea, I'll continue to solicit folks to do that. If folks don't believe it's a good idea, I don't need to send the email out. And so it's really you guys' decision, it's not my decision, of, really what you wanna do. You know what I'm referring to, right, Jason?
I'm sorry, you're talking about like including the agenda at all, or
No.
doing the reports ahead of time?
No, I sent out an email and we had an example at our last meeting. We have a written report from a couple committees, right? And so my question is that something the board would like to do going forward? Or if not, that's okay too. So that's what I'd like to get a sense of, because I don't need to be sending emails and clogging up your email box if in fact folks are, really thinking this is a worthwhile part of their time. So Mary Heather?
Yeah, I'll advocate for doing it for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's beneficial to have written materials and the meeting materials for folks to glance over first. I think the potential for having the information presented swiftly, because the materials have already been provided for board members and the public, I think is beneficial. It also puts a little bit less of the burden for recording that information on me as the secretary, which I would definitely welcome. There are some organizations on here that don't have minutes that are available on our websites. The SEPAC is one of them. And I think the extent to which we can gather up our information to provide an easily packaged sort of a report to our community members without having to expect them to go to each individual meeting and find the minutes from that date. I think it does a public service that I think is beneficial to both our board members and our community. So I would highly advocate for it.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Suzanne.
Seems like it's the executive committee that's advocating for this.
I know.
But I've seen this work in other boards, and it's helpful because during the public comment period, if somebody shows up first thing and they saw what was coming up but couldn't stay, they could say, "Oh, I saw on your facilities report or whatever that you're working on this, and I might like to congratulate or whatever." But it sometimes prompts the community to say something that they might not have considered, or they might not be able to stay. The other thing is that it's another way of putting out there what's been going on, a very brief synopsis of it. Sometimes our meetings run late, and sometimes it's easier to have something pre-printed or written out, so that you don't accidentally make a mistake when you're reporting out. So that's another way, but any way that there is for community to have a synopsis of what's going on up front is always helpful.
Others, thoughts? It's okay to think otherwise. Okay. So I'm not quite sure how the feedback I'm receiving and the silence, how that is, I already knew the
I don't hear
Suzanne and
Keep
Mary.
emailing
Yep,
people.
but I don't hear any dissent, so
Okay.
continue on.
Okay, I can do that.
Objects in motion tend to stay in motion unless acted upon by
Okay.
another force, so.
Okay.
And objects at rest tend to stay at rest until.
Yeah.
Verbiage there, just keep going with it.
Okay, cool. So, thank you. So let's go and do our committee updates. Communication engagement.
Yep, so we sent out our quarterly update. we are having some really great, interesting discussions about engaging the community and what we want the purpose of our quarterly update to be. So that's a work in progress that's going to probably be shifting over the coming year. And then we continue to flesh out our plans for next year's school board town hall meetings. We drafted a statement of purpose for those meetings just to guide our thoughts and work. I probably should have gotten that to you guys so that you could all see it, but I will try and remember to do that for our first August meeting.
It will be the last August. It's when we're doing the full update. Yeah. Thank you. Any questions for Tricia? Thank you for that. Finance.
Finance Committee did not meet in June and will reconvene in August for the FY27 budget process kickoff.
Woohoo! You're awesome, Jason. Thank you. And Matt. And everyone else.
Facilities Committee update.
Yes, Facilities Committee is working away at the Process A, capital improvement planning. Worked through Mary Hogan and had our first meeting with Michaela about moms. Quick intro at NUHS and we'll continue to work with NUHS. And then we're trying to schedule meetings throughout the summer for Process B and the continuation of Process A. We'll see how that goes, given the summer schedules.
And I apologize, the agenda item said discussion and actions. That was left over. That's what happens when you cut and paste.
I will say at the Facilities Committee, we did also talk a bit through the impacts of 454 and just trying to, I think, wrap our minds around that bill and then just see a path forward to try to understand like how that kind of merges into the work that committee's doing. And don't know that my committee members would agree, but it didn't feel clear to me that we're gonna have to sort out what that looks like.
That brought up a really interesting example, which is if Middlebury, for example, is a regional high school, when do the students all start coming? It's like, well, July 1st, 2028 is one option. Mm-hmm. Caitlin was not interested in that kind of thing. No, she was not. You know, abrupt drop-in of students from many other places. And I think, you know, although, you know, ultimately that will be up to the board that is in charge of that, perhaps as long as the legislature leaves it up to that board, those duties and responsibilities of those boards are still to be determined. It could be that the legislature determines that this is the district and this is the regional high school, and this is when students will begin to attend. Part of what Caitlin was talking about is, okay, her daughter would happen to be a senior who would then attend, who would not have had the junior part of the DP program, and that's a student for whom that would be really important. So, you know, her very appropriate comment was, perhaps we should be working with our peers to transition things, and if we had control of that process, indeed, we would be doing that. You know, that's just kind of one of the things that we will be sorting out, you know, if this continues and as it continues to move forward. It's a great example.
Okay, next is Policy Committee, and Laura's going to give us the report.
Yep, we've been working on C30 still, with lots of discussion around using community value statements to guide the formation of our next C30 revision. We've decided that we really need to do a community survey to determine what our community's values really are. We feel like we're making a lot of assumptions at the committee level, and we'd like to get some real feedback from the community. So we're planning on running some community focus groups, one per each town, held over a 6-week period this fall, potentially late September through October. These focus groups would help us to develop a survey about what the community's values are around school attendance, with the aim of having a survey out to the public in early November, and then findings from the survey back and ready for a report to the board by January. At this point, we've discussed a lot of different versions of school choice, controlled choice, flexible boundaries, etc. But we really feel like we need that feedback to be able to put together a policy that we feel good about as a committee, and then hopefully as a board. We're also getting ready to look at A23, which is community and engagement, F27, which is government flagpole, and E21, distribution of non-school sponsored literature in schools. We're also going to be reviewing policies that are out of date that may or may not need any changes, but do need to be reviewed and readopted.
Thanks, Laura. And going through the legislative report, there is a policy that is going to be required, I believe, F5 now, a behavioral threat level. And
Yeah, that should start to come out actually in October. They're hoping to release that then, and
okay,
much of it are practices that we are already utilizing in place, but we will look for their policy and bring it forward at that point.
excellent. Thank you. Negotiations, Steve, is there anything you would like to share?
We're meeting, an organizational meeting on Monday, and we're going to start outlining what our strategy is for the support staff. So we have not met yet, but it is coming on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Student Outcomes Committee, Ellen.
We have concluded meeting for June. We're going to resume meeting in August, and the homework that the Outcomes Committee has is to look at all the information that Courtney has given us around the different measures and metrics by which the district assesses student outcomes and student success, and to try to layer those over our strategic plan so we can understand ways that we are or potentially are not able to measure our progress across the whole of the strategic plan, not just the success section. And we're also just playing scheduling gymnastics, trying to find the magical day every month that we can meet on a regular basis. But I believe in us. I think we can find it. So.
And it sounds like already you've hit the road running. So
yeah, we've had a lot of really good meetings, but just to establish a routine schedule would be good.
It will be really helpful for that committee now that we expect to have our VTCAP data for 2025 in July. So thinking about what is meant by the language in the strategic plan that says that we are to reduce the inequities by a certain amount at a certain amount of time, like exactly what is that? That would be helpful, and there'll be 2 years of data that you could utilize to be thinking about that. That would be really helpful.
Wendy, you brought that up at the last meeting. I think that's so interesting, and I was actually going to go. It's a good reminder to do some digging through the meeting minutes from the ad hoc committee, the group of us who worked on the strategic plan over a relatively concentrated period of time, just to refresh on the thinking of that group at least, and then potentially the larger board as we discuss the strategic plan before adopting it. Because you were saying that like 3 different people interpreted that metric of success 3 different ways. So, which is great to know, and we can try to pin down some more clear definitions on what that means.
Excellent. And if you need an agenda item at some point on the board, just let us.
Yes, that's another thing we're going to talk about come August, is sort of working with Courtney and Wendy to figure out what a good cadence and timeline would look like for reporting out to the board in more comprehensive ways, and how that lines up with different assessment dates and things like that.
Thank you so much. Hannaford Career Center, Steve and Laura.
So we met on Thursday, got some background on some of the end of year festivities, did a good wrap up at the end of this year. Projected attendance is up for next year, although there is still room for like 200 something seats, I believe, at the center in general. Again, they're hoping that this could be addressed by some of these boundary changes that are potentially coming down the pike. me see. They're gonna be doing some RFPs for some capital improvement stuff this summer in terms of some new equipment, some new minibuses, and they're doing some improvements to the floor on one of the lab rooms. Agreed to pause the engineering program again for another year for low enrollment or low projected enrollment, and talks about how they might incorporate some of that program if they don't get more people interested in for the coming, not this coming year, but the one after that, how they might incorporate some of what we would be missing into a different program. But other than that, pretty steady there, I would say.
Excellent.
Anything you want to add, Steve?
Nope, that sounds good to me. I mean, that was a good summary of everything that I heard.
And I think in the same legislative report, if my memory serves me correctly, they have lifted the restriction that if in fact another area has students that they don't have room for, that they can then come, to a place like Hannaford Career Center. I'm pretty sure I read that.
Well, they can do that now, is my understanding. It's there's some complexities to it. Steve probably has a better handle on that.
Yeah, so right now it's if they have the same program that Hannaford does, students aren't really allowed unless there's there's some special dispensation, and the new legislation I think raises that barrier. The big question is, if they're coming from Rutland, which is probably where most of them would come from, what's the transportation situation? Is Rutland willing to, is Stafford or Rutland District, are they willing to pay for bus service all the way up here, which could be expensive? So there's some unknowns about that, but really the more you can get at Hannaford, it lowers the cost per student. So that would, if we get 100 students from Rutland coming in, that further diffuses the cost to our districts that have always been sending people to Hannaford. So it's good news. It's just we, like many things with the legislation, we're not sure how it's going to sugar out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. Stay tuned. Next is Addison Central SEPAC. Is there any updates for them?
No, they said that we didn't meet last month, and they said stay tuned for the next meeting, so we're still staying tuned. I haven't seen or heard anything, so.
To my understanding, there hasn't been any prior to, or the last report that we reported out on, there were some reps from SEPAC at least participating in some of the hiring for the special education director, so, but we haven't been involved in any.
And the director of equity, inclusion, and restorative practice.
Yeah. Okay. And Suzanne, would you like to say any more for the for School Board Association?
So there is what there is. We sent out a letter today just thanking everyone for their wonderful service over the course of the year. That came from the VSBA reps, and Mark and I are thinking of being the first ones to try the district-wide communication and do possibly a coffee and cookies evening to see if we can get some people out, but stay tuned.
Thank you. And Middlebury Community TV, we did meet the second Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm trying to remember, get my dates right. I can't remember. I think it's on a Tuesday. And a lot of the time was really spent recapping, graduation and that kind of thing. We do end up being a major part of their clientele from that perspective, especially towards the end of the school year. So Drew was everywhere. Thankfully. So that's all I had. So that brings us up to the second public comment period. There's no public in the room. It doesn't look like there's public online. Nope. And that then brings us to board reflections. Does anyone have any board reflections for this evening?
You can tell it's our last meeting of
Yes.
the business
Yep.
of the year.
Well, I do. I just want to, since this is really the end of the school year, right? I just want to thank everyone for all of the hard work that everyone has put in. It just seems like June of last year was so long ago. And it seems like a couple years, it really does, for the amount of work that we have been engaged in. And I just really appreciate what we as a board have been able to accomplish and the roles that everyone here and on the board has really contributed. So that's my reflection. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful July off. And I'd say summer, but it's just July, and a well-deserved rest from some of the grueling board activities. So, and with that, if no one else would like to say anything, I'll motion to adjourn.
So
In a second. Thank you, Jason. And we're 4 minutes early.